Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Naijaman's Perspective. With me in the studio is my brother, longtime friend, Imo Ukpe. Imo Ukpe, we've been trying to do this for quite some time. How are you doing, my brother?
I'm good. It's been ages. I'm happy to finally, be on a Naijaman's Perspective. You've been doing great stuff, and I'm honored that, we're able to make that time today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we're just going to go right into it. Imo and I talk a lot about geopolitics, and the world that we live in is ever changing. Like the title says, in a rapidly changing world. There's so much stuff happening in Africa, EU, the Middle East, particularly over the last couple of weeks. Some people will say over the last 4 decades. Depends on who you speak to. What's your view of what's going on?
Okay, well, there's that Chinese proverb, maybe I won't say it directly, that we are blessed to live in interesting times, and I mean, depends on your timeline. The past 3 years since 2022, when the Russian-Ukraine war started, or some people will say that war started since 2014, so everything depends on perspective. Israel, Iran, I mean, did it start 2 weeks ago, or did it start October 7th, or did it start, 60, 70, 80 years ago? It all depends on perspective.
Yes, it does. It does. And it seems, some people jump into the conversation in the middle without knowing what started. So can you give us just a brief overview as to what started this problem in the Middle East? Why can't we get peace in the Middle East?
Well, the Middle East has been, mad in conflict since biblical times, so there's that. But more recently, I mean, ever since the creation of the state of Israel, without the corresponding creation of a state for the Palestinians, and that's a very generic name. Okay, there has been conflict. I'm told that area known as Palestine, which today includes Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, parts of Jordan, under various treaties, there's the Balfour Declaration, there are a couple of other treaties where it's been promised to the Jews, it's been promised to the Arabs, it's been promised to at least 3 different parties, So at the end of the day, everybody believes that they have a stake, on that piece of land, So prior to 1948, I'm sure it would surprise you that all Jews living in what is considered Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, they all had Palestinian passports. Even
really?
Golda Meir, one of Israel's most famous prime ministers, had a Palestinian passport. So if we say Palestine, we are speaking about a geographical territory. For Nigerians, you might want to say the Southwest, Lagos State, whatever it is, the United States. But the problem is that land had multiple peoples, okay? And that's the issue. So you want to create nation states from multiple ethnicities, and that's where the problem arises. The British couldn't handle it, and they gave that mandate to the UN. At the end of the day, the UN came up with the 2-state solution. The Israelis, or the state of Israel, got its independence in 1948, primarily because they took up what was offered by the United Nations. However, the Arabs living in Palestine protested because they felt that too much of their land had been given to the Jews. Rather than take up what had been offered by the UN, I mean, they opted to protest, never took up that offer, never got their independence. I mean, they say a counter offer, doesn't make a valid contract, so there's that. So at the end of the day, the Jews or the Israelis stepped forward, took the offer of independence. There was protests. The other Arab countries attacked. There were skirmishes, which transformed into full-scale war. initially the Israelis were beaten back, but after a couple of ceasefires, they came back and they ended up taking over the land with each successive war, and that has been the story. So at the end of the day, they feel like a people, they feel that they are the victims. They are people that are constantly living under, the threat of imminent invasion from all their Arab neighbors. Okay.
Oh.
Then there are the Arabs in the West Bank and Gaza who also feel like the victims, and unfortunately, they haven't moved forward, maybe through no fault of theirs. They have considered themselves refugees and displaced persons for 80 years.
It's a long time.
So for me, there are lots of questions to be asked. Before Israel took over their land, the question is, who governed it? At times, possibly Jordan, Egypt, different countries have ruled over them. Why didn't those countries give them independence? Questions need to be asked. Whose interests were being served? At the end of the day, Israelis looked at all the interests, they played one against the other, and with every conflict, they have benefited until the latest. So that's it. You can imagine even global bodies like the United Nations, they've resolved so many issues. They've resolved the issue of Northern Ireland, with the IRA and all the troubles that they'd had there. They've resolved issues in South Africa, all over the world. But there doesn't seem to be either a solution or the political will to implement a solution in that portion of the Middle East. It's that simple.
So thank you for that. I just want to take you back a little bit. You said they made promises to them, and those promises were not honored. Promises in terms of these people own this land, these people own that land. Who made those promises, and why weren't those promises honored? Do you know? Or what's your view on it, rather?
Well, some may say that the colonial powers at the time over that general area, Syria, what is Israel and the West Bank today, were the United Kingdom and France. So promises were made. I mean, anyone can Google the Balfour Declaration, which promises, an Israeli homeland. Promises were made to the French. Promises were made to the Arabs at different times. So let's not say that this was done intentionally, but at different times, under different circumstances, certain, I wouldn't say commitments, but like I use the word very loosely, promises were made, for an Arab homeland and a Jewish homeland and so on. But at the end of the day, due to a series of events, this was passed on to the United Nations. There was a UN mandate, and the United Nations resolved that a two-state solution was the best solution for that area. I want to clarify, when people speak about Palestinians, I'm not sure it's right to say that there is a people that are Palestinian. Okay? I mean, you're from Nigeria, so you know that they are Nigerians, but Nigerians have so many ethnicities. So if I use the word Palestinian, at different times, it could mean all the people that live or have lived there. And at another time, like today, it's used in on CNN or any other news media, they would refer specifically to the Arabs in the West Bank and Gaza, so to say, and they are referred to as Palestinians.
But here's the question:
that whole area was divided essentially into three. People forget that what was considered Palestine includes Jordan. So which is the East Bank. So there's the state of the Kingdom of Jordan, and what was on the west is what you have Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank and Gaza and so on. But the issue is simply this: people consider that, oh, the Jews got 48% of the land. Well, the facts may tend to differ because when you include
Your
the fact
your
that,
your 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 audio is a bit choppy.
okay, no
Okay.
problem. When you include the fact that Jordan is part of that equation, then you can no longer say that the Jews got 48% of the land, and there is an Arab state. Jordan is an Arab state, carved from what was originally known as Palestine. Okay, so there is an Arab state, there is a Jewish state. However, I think it's very hard to find a solution. If the people were able to get along, you would say, let's have a neutral state and that both be citizens of that state, but it's not that simple. Blood has been shed, people have lost, on both sides. And I can tell you that it's very hard for them to compromise. It is possible, but I mean, if world powers, weigh in, apply pressure, I'm sure that a compromise could be reached. But when I say world powers, it's not just global superpowers. Now, there are regional superpowers that you have to consider. You have to consider the opinions of Saudi Arabia, Iran. You have to consider that if you want to have a viable, sustainable peace in that region. You have to consider all parties to that conflict, and it's not just those that are bearing arms today.
Okay, thank you very much. And the second question I had was around when you say Israel was made a state, well, what we call modern Israel in 1948, why wasn't Palestinian given that opportunity for sovereignty, or were they given and they chose not to accept it because of some certain maybe conditions? If you could just like to tell our viewers.
Yeah. I would just say the Palestinian Arabs, okay, because originally Jordanians, Jews, the Palestinian Arabs, I mean, they were all in that one big lump of dirt known as Palestine, so there's that. Well, they protested, they couldn't organize and come together. The Jews, maybe under the umbrella of what was known as the Zionist movement, were quick to take the opportunity, choose an interim prime minister and declare independence. They don't stare a gift horse in the mouth. They took it immediately and never looked back. The Palestinian Arabs felt cheated. Maybe they were. I'm not competent to look into that. But rather than take nationhood, they opted to protest, and there were skirmishes. I mean, it depends on who you ask who started these skirmishes, but at the end of the day, it resulted in full-blown conflict. And at the end of the day, the Palestinian Arabs became refugees in Jordan, Syria, and all over the place.
Okay, so this particular, I mean, it started with Israel and Palestine. Now Iran is in the mix. Again, in the Middle East, the USA is in the mix. We're hearing
Hamas,
yes,
so many
and some other fringe countries that
groups.
are
Yes.
not directly, but they are also giving statements. There seems to be some kind of pathway towards, if not peace, but at least stopping the current arsenal of weapons being cascaded in both countries. I'm talking about Iran and Israel now, just moving away from the Palestine conversation. This current fiasco that happened over the last couple of weeks, that President Trump himself waded into, and you could tell from the way he was speaking, he didn't want war to erupt. What's your view of what made that escalate, and what can be done to ensure that, because Israel keeps on being in the middle of all these skirmishes, but what do you think?
Well, it's not easy, but essentially Israel has been America's key ally in the Middle East, and
Correct.
America has always had Israel's back. It's that simple. And whatever the issue is, they have been a staunch defender of Israel, irrespective of who's at fault at each stage of the conflict. America has always had Israel's back.
The loyalty.
Yes, there's that. Now, some would say, as a result, Israel has a knack of getting America involved, in its wars. That's one view. The other view is that America wants to ensure that the only consistent democratic nation in the Middle East, remains viable and is not wiped off the face of the earth. There's that. And then, of course, you have to understand the undercurrents with Christian evangelicals in the US, who, believe that there's a biblical mandate to support the state of Israel, as you heard from a senator on, Tucker's podcast, where it seemed that he was not able to delineate between biblical Israel and the modern state of Israel or government of Israel.
Is it the same Israel? Is it the same Israel?
So, well, that depends who you ask, depends on which pastor you ask. So I won't go there, I need to brush up on my theology before I get involved in those questions, But the point is this. As a result of that, apart from the fact that Israel is claimed has a nuclear deterrent, but the key deterrent is that they have Uncle Sam having their back. And so Israel has a population of 9 million people. Iran has a population of 92. Despite sanctions, Iran has serious, has what I consider a serious technological advantage over a lot of countries, in the Middle East.
That's Iran.
Yes. Not just in terms of buying weapons, they have scientists, nuclear scientists. For them to develop a nuclear program, that's not a joke, And
so we'll come to the nuclear program in a bit, but I have a question on that. But keep going.
When you look at the back of that, the issue is that the Iranians believe in the rights of Palestinian Arabs to self-determination, and at certain times, they believe in the fact that possibly Israel should not have the right to exist. I don't know what the current position is, but essentially, they've been in conflict with Israel for 3-4 decades, and even more through proxies, So there's that. Everybody in the area has a say, and funding, whether direct, indirect, or even just in terms of goodwill, for the various armed groups that have been fighting Israel on behalf of the rights of the Palestinian Arabs have been there. Now, bear in mind that Iran has been under sanctions, with respect to its nuclear program. The Israelis bombed their nuclear facilities in the 80s, early 80s, late 80s or early 90s. So that speaks to the fact that Israel has consistently said Iran should not be allowed to have nuclear facilities. Every country technically has that right. And that's why there's a treaty called Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Correct.
Okay, which allows countries to develop nuclear power so that they can grow their economies, for peaceful means. Okay, and there's a body that supervises and monitors and regulates all this, known as the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Okay, and so, France, England, US, Russia, so many countries have nuclear facilities, okay, to generate power. That's practically the cheapest and possibly the cleanest form of energy. Okay, arguably. Yes. So
so why are some countries allowed to have them and the majority are not allowed?
I don't think it's
in your view.
It is power politics. Those that have will control those that do not. They control access, to the big boys' table. It's that simple. Now, it's not necessarily just nuclear facilities, mind you. It is the aim is to ensure that they do not develop a nuclear weapon. Having nuclear facilities for peaceful purposes. I mean, you use it in medicine and so many other aspects of life, but for peaceful purposes. And this is governed and regulated generally by the IAEA. So nobody stops that. And that's monitored. However, the worry is when countries want to develop a nuclear weapon, and that involves enriching uranium to 90% and over, okay, by means of centrifuges, which Iran has. So, but for me, that's one question. The second question is, it's a moral question. It is highly suspected that Iran has nuclear weapons.
That they have.
Yes, but they're not.
Because I've read different accounts. Some I've heard 60% capacity, but not fully. So nobody seems to have a consensus.
That is in the realm of speculation.
Right.
Okay.
That's why I said I read.
Yes. So we can't take that as confirmed fact. I haven't seen, and you haven't seen, an intelligence report that's confirmed it. However, that having been said, they are not a signatory
to the IAEA.
To the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they are not a member of the IAEA. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said. What gives them the moral right to speak about?
You're talking about Israel now.
Yes.
And why is only one Middle East country allowed to have nuclear weapons in the region?
Allegedly allowed to have. Okay. So the aim is that. Personally, does Iran want to have a nuclear weapon? I doubt it. I could be wrong, because you have to look at how that changes the playing field. If Iran develops a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia has to develop a nuclear weapon to maintain deterrent. Turkey has to develop a nuclear weapon. Do you see? So the whole place becomes...
It's not a chain reaction, is what you're saying.
Yes. So that's why it's better that no country, not just Iran, no country in the Middle East should be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Yes. That's simple. That's a simple solution. Let's not escalate this, So, because just as you have extremists and fundamentalists on one end, we must recognize that there are possibly those on the other, So, I believe in peace, and I don't think any country in the Middle East should be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. That having been said, even in terms of conventional warfare, Iran are the masters of what we call preemptive strike. And you see the news media that back them, when Iran hit Israel at the start of what Trump called the 12-day war, news media talked about preemptive strikes. But international law does not allow you, unless there is an imminent threat. Was Iran going to develop a nuclear weapon in a matter of days or weeks?
Unlikely.
Would you say? I mean, if I take the comments of the director of national intelligence in the US, Tulsi Gabbard, before Congress, where she said they are years away from that, from developing a nuclear weapon.
And are these people that have been given rights to inspect? Because I understand that this kind of thing,
inspectors, yes. So they've been monitoring, and I've been told, they've put cameras, this, that. So maybe Iran hasn't always fully cooperated, but at the end of the day, the report is quite clear, and it shows that they have not developed a nuclear weapon, and they are not close
to developing one.
To develop a nuclear weapon, you need to enrich uranium to above 90%. So if they enrich uranium up to 60%, what does that say about motive or intent? I don't know. Sometimes it could be a bargaining chip, Not necessarily that they may want to, but I can't speak for the Iranians. I'm sorry, I can't speak for them. But those are questions that they would have to answer, but based on their own local laws and legislations, there has been a ban on, or a fatwa on, developing nuclear weapons. So there's that. If I take them at face value, it's that simple. That being said, someone asked, so what exactly were you doing enriching uranium to 60%? That's a valid question.
In terms of what are they using it for? But is uranium not a multi-purpose natural mineral?
No, there's enrichment up to 3, 6, 7%.
Right.
But when you're enriching uranium up to the point of 60%, questions need to be asked.
In terms of what do you need that much for?
What do you need to enrich this to this extent for? If it's not preparing, to have a nuclear weapon, So there's that. But they were not there. That's one question. But it seemed they were on the road, on the road to that goal. So it seems. The experts would know better. But I don't know why you're enriching uranium up to 60%. It means you were going somewhere. Okay? So there's that. That having been said, with the preemptive strikes, Israel has hit Syria, has hit Gaza, has hit Lebanon, and they've all folded like a pack of cards, so it seems.
Absolutely.
But Iran is a whole different kettle of fish, and I guess Israel discovered why America has not launched airstrikes or invaded Iran, like people have assumed they would have done with Iraq, because they knew Iran is a different kettle of fish, So the truth is that Israel was not prepared for a long drawn-out conflict. They thought they would hit them, America would come in, and it would be all over. They didn't expect the Iranian response. Hezbollah, Hamas, all those groups in Gaza and in Lebanon, they were firing rockets. Missiles are a whole different ball game, especially when you're talking about the type of missiles that Iran has been firing. Missiles that leave the Earth's atmosphere and come down. I'm afraid that Israel's defense capability, whether it's the Iron Dome, which was developed specifically for rockets, which is low altitude flying ordnance, it's not the same thing as missiles. Missiles move at Mach 1, Mach 2, and faster. Or, we're talking about over 400, 500 kilometers per hour. And that, my brother, is possibly beyond what Israel's air defenses could handle. And
did that take you surprise? Did that take you by surprise?
Because I did, because
the media
Israel was considered, impregnable. But Iran tested it out, towards the end of last year. They just flooded the zone, with so many drones, so many missiles. There's only so much air defenses can do at any given point in time. If you are launching 1 or 2 missiles, they're easy to intercept. But when you send a barrage of 100, 200, that will definitely overwhelm any air defense.
Correct.
So there's that. And so the US and other NATO countries had to come to the aid of Israel. Okay? All European countries came to the aid of Israel. We won't name names. There are different systems. David Slingshot, what they call the THAAD system. US submarines and warships were firing, interceptor missiles. And still, the damage that was done in Israel was more than anything that Hezbollah and Hamas were able to do. A missile could wreck my bedroom.
Unbelievable.
A rocket would wreck my bedroom. But a missile, with 100 kilogram or 400 kilogram warhead can decimate a whole apartment block easily, So the bottom line is that the Israelis didn't expect, the fight back that they got from the Iranians. And certain parts of Tel Aviv and Haifa, are said to look like Gaza 2.0. So
Wow.
I don't know, but they didn't expect that. Usually they go into their, once the air raid sirens come on, they go into their bomb shelters. When it's over, they come out and they change the broken glass and they move on. But this time, buildings were flattened. They hit the equivalent. I mean, it's alleged that they hit the equivalent of the Pentagon. A research center or something, the Weizmann Center, things like that.
Within
The
Israel.
Israeli Stock Exchange.
Yes.
I mean, these are
So
signs
these are
of
strategics. These are strategic
Yes.
locations as well.
And there's a psychological impact on that, on the whole nation. So I mean, you cannot underestimate the fact that Iran responded in a manner that was not expected, by the Israelis, both in the sheer volume and the targets. Just like Israel hit some oil fields or gas fields, that Iranians had with the Qataris. The Iranians hit back and damaged a major oil refinery, and the impact of that in Israel will be felt almost immediately within a matter of a day or two.
Of course.
So the fact is that Israel didn't prepare for the Iranian fight back. And while I would say they are the masters of the preemptive strike, how they were able to overcome Iranian air defenses, were they sleeping? Were they switched off? Was there a virus? There are so many, yes, there are more questions than answers. But I mean, it was prolific. But you may be able to win the first skirmish, but not necessarily win the war. And Israel and their backers didn't have the staying power. Because interceptor missiles, they're said to be in low supply, less than 2 weeks supply. If Iran continued, at the pace of bombing 400 missiles a day, then we're talking about, some serious damage. Because
some serious damage, yeah.
Yes, I mean, it's alleged that it's 400 missiles a day. It could. I don't know the facts. It could be less. It could be more. But at the end of the day, these come from the U.S. How many are manufactured a day? The U.S. is possibly low on supplies. The Ukraine is asking for those interceptor missiles. Israel needs them. The U.S. needs them. So
lots of
what does
demand.
that tell you? NATO, European countries need them. So, but the military-industrial complex can't meet the demand. And the truth was that Israel and the US at the moment cannot conduct a long drawn-out war with Iran. This is not Iraq that you level in
a couple of weeks,
or you bomb Libya for 1 week, or you bomb Gaza. A conflict with Iran would last months. And from what we've seen, some people were caught pants down and they couldn't hold out and sustain a conflict for 1 month. And we should be happy for that, because that means lives have been saved.
Yes.
Okay? So there's that.
Lives have been saved. And on that positive note, as we close, what is the path to peace for you? Just to summarize and conclude.
Well, the path to peace is not clear. Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, and people say, oh, the main buyer of Iranian oil is China, but China has options. They will take losses, in the short term, a month, 2. They'll buy more from Russia and other sources. Nigeria, who knows, Angola. They'll buy oil from other sources. But the fact that they've closed the Strait of Hormuz will impact oil prices, and that will have negative connotations for the US economy, for the EU economy, and global economy, because global oil prices will go up. Not just if Iran stops supplying oil, it's not Iranian oil or Iran that loses alone. Global oil prices will go up. because global supply is affected. So that decision is going to impact the world. And at the end of the day, maybe Iran wants the world to pick a side. Path for peace, I think for now, America has had Israel's back because probably President Trump had to meet the expectations of some of his home base, okay? Although the MAGA movement are clearly against war because he campaigned on peace, ending all these forever wars.
Yes.
So, however, he has local legislations and bills to pass, the big, beautiful bill. So things like that. And so he needs Congress and the Senate. And so politics is a tricky business. And so
midterms are around the corner.
Yes. So at the end of the day, all parties need to do a little bit of give and take. Right now, they've destroyed facilities, nuclear facilities in Iran. Okay. The jury is still out on how far that has set back their program. But I think all parties have had a bloodied nose, and I think they will sheath swords for now. The main point is simply this: the fact that some people were touting for regime change. If they step back on that, that's a good step towards peace. If you stop assassinating political leadership in any country, that's a good step towards peace, And at the end of the day, negotiations need to resume. Okay, it's very important. But the key question is, who is going to build that trust? There's the belief that the negotiations that were going on between between the US and Israel, were simply a gimmick to lull the Iranians, into a sense of security, while the strikes were always going to go ahead, So at the end of the day, there needs to be trust. We need leaders with integrity. And most of all, the world needs peace in the Middle East.
Thank you so much. On that note, I just want to give a special thanks to Imo Ukpe for joining me today. This was powerful. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Imo, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, are you on social media and are you comfortable sharing that?
Well, I'm always available to a Naijaman's perspective. Let's leave it that way for now.
We'll leave it that way. If you have any questions or comments for Imo or anything that he said, please put it in the comment section. This is a two-way street. Well, it's two of us against everybody else in the comment section. So feel free to leave your comments. It doesn't matter whatever you think, whether you're on the EU side, the Iran side, Israel side, peace side, whatever. Just leave your comments. Keep it clean as usual. And I'll see you in the next one.
Cheers, buddy.